This is Tech Talk HSC El Paso. Hello, I'm Jay Koester, and I have your news and events for this week. It can be difficult to keep up with the avalanche of medical news that comes each week from medical journals and studies. But one important source for discussion of the week's medical news comes right out of TTUHSC El Paso, the weekly podcast, PodMed Double T. TTUHSC El Paso President Richard Lange co-hosts the podcast with medical journalist Elizabeth Tracey. The two have been recording the podcast together for 14 years. Tracey and Dr. Lange said the longevity and success of their podcasting relationship can be attributed to consistency and trustworthiness.
As far as we know, it's the first medical podcast ever done. And over that 14 years, there's been a certain level of consistency. It's very conversational. I mean, Elizabeth and I, we picked the studies we're going to talk about from the hundreds that are published that week, but we don't talk about them beforehand until we're actually online.
Tracey and Dr. Lange began podcasting together when they worked together at Johns Hopkins, where Tracey still works. They each bring certain strengths to the podcast, with Tracey able to interview medical experts to learn a variety of opinions, and Dr. Lange able to use a doctor's eye to read through the many studies that come out each week.
What started us doing it was just the knowledge that there was this technology that was out there that we could do pretty easily. As you know, Rick was at Johns Hopkins, and that's where I am. And so that's when we first started our recording career. I had interviewed him a number of times for different stories relative to cardiology. So when this idea came up, I needed someone who was a full professor, somebody who was in a medical specialty rather than a surgical specialty, who was going to be comfortable talking about the whole breadth of medicine, because, of course, things happen all over the place, not just in cardiology. And so Rick stepped up to that, and we were able to develop this really successful interaction.
After recording the podcast under the auspices of Johns Hopkins for many years, longtime fans were worried when PodMed was discontinued last year. But Tracey and Dr. Lange quickly created the new podcast, PodMed Double T, under the umbrella of TTUHSC El Paso, allowing listeners to continue to learn about the latest medical news.
And after 14 years, we weren't ready to give it up. The ability to be able to take complex studies or complex scientific research and bring it to our listeners on a weekly basis is still very important to Elizabeth and I. So even though we changed it from Hopkins to Texas Tech, there was never any question that we were going to continue it.
You can find PodMed Double T on iTunes or your favorite podcasting app. Subscribe today so that you don't miss a week. And for more information about what's happening on campus, visit facebook.com/TTUHSC EP. Guns up, we'll see you next week.